So welcome to all of you. Thank you for taking the assignment of discussing how we deliver for gender equality and meet the SDG goals, basically. How do we build the world we want and want for our children? With the global picture provided by Quilin, our intention now is to shine a light on some of the key elements in an inclusive and interrelated discussion. One element is how to expand women's access to decent jobs. Second is, can we solve the conundrum of childcare and family responsibilities? And the third is, what steps to take to really share the value with women's enterprises. Our speakers' expertise and experience will help us break down the silos and see the codependency of these elements. From the gender dividend to register economically and materially improve women's and their families' lives, we must generate decent jobs. In fact, Goal 8 of the 2030 Agenda calls for the promotion of sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment and decent work. And complicating the picture is the World Economic Forum's warning of disruptive labor changes that may result in the global economy losing 7.1 million jobs while creating just 2 million new ones. So any shortfall will disproportionately impact women. And while that describes the macro level, today we'll hear from a CEO who's been making profound changes that have a direct positive effect on women's labor force participation. Ms. Nurgur's leadership propelled her knitwear and apparel company into one of the most notable SMEs in Turkey, recognized by the government for putting gender equality and work-life considerations as top priorities. Not surprisingly, Nurgur was the first Turkish CEO to sign on to the WEPs. We'll also listen in as Ms. Tammy Medard, CEO of ANZ Bank in Laos, reports on what she is doing to shake up long-held conventions about what women can and cannot do in that small emerging Southeast Asian country. Changing social norms is definitely a theme for this event and an SDG assignment too. And we've got panelist Josh Levs, who takes on the sacred dogma of gender role. Upending these conventions is vital too. So if women are to comprise their share of the workforce in decent jobs. Our participant, Najma Malik, brings it all together. She's a South African industry leader and job creator, and she's not only the sole owner of Mizan Building Services, a construction and building maintenance company, she also owns 51% of an electrical company, which is 90% women-owned. So she's become a public procurement expert in order to succeed, and she shares this expertise to help other women in business. So we're going to discuss jobs first, then move to childcare and family, and then go to entrepreneurship. And I'll ask each panelist a lead question and encourage the others to give examples from their perspective. So there are no silos here. We'll move with Turkey. Turkey has the lowest women's labor force participation in the OECD, just 30.8% compared to men's 76%. To be clear, the OECD women's labor force participation average is considerably higher at 62.8%. Noor, how are you breaking the traditional mold, and what are the numbers of Sutex, and what is the quality of the jobs? Noor?
Thank you, dear moderator, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start by thanking you for giving me this opportunity. How did we break the mold, and how did we break through the traditional society's rules? I should like to start from myself that I was an early entrepreneur. At the age of 20, I started my first business. But I was coming from a family that I've seen a working mother and I was well educated and I had international experience. But between the age of 20 to 30, in those 10 years, I had all the experience that I could have in business atmosphere. Let it be black swan, let it be ceilings, glass walls, and how to go by to exist and survive in the menswear society for the years 70s, 80s. So I just said to myself, when I established my own company, I just said that, well, things have to be so different, and it has to be like beyond the dreams of anybody, that none of the people working in the company, and especially women, should have to go through what I went through in my own experience. So that the philosophy is born on its pillars by this wish. And number one pillar of the philosophy is that it's enough, being human is enough to be equal. We don't have any segregation, we don't have any discrimination in our company. Let it be gender equality is a natural, integral part of it. The second one, the pillar is, I always believed that it is the entrepreneurial's responsibility to establish a decent working place atmosphere and to really even train its people, give them what they want, before you can ask them to give their full commitment into the company. So that's the second pillar. The third one is that it's also a contradictory maybe to one of the most believed principles, that I don't believe that entrepreneurs, managers, and working people are contradicting to each other and they are conflicted parties. On the contrary, I believe that it's like a circle hand in hand. They work together for the same cause as to make their company optimum profitable, and yet the company atmosphere has to be a place worth living with and humanely living with. So how do you go by sharing it? So since 17 years, to back this principle, we have profit-sharing system in our company that quarterly we are distributing profits to our working people. Anybody enrolled in the payroll is entitled to that. But then, if you have such a company, how are you going to manage it? So comes two more pillars, the one being non-hierarchical management system. We don't have hierarchy, but we have teams working together and a free voice speaking atmosphere that all the management decisions, let it be financial and social, is taken by the people themselves. So it's been over 16, 17 years, but since the establishment, that all these sustainable goals have been encrusted in our company's then you can say what kind of a result you are having in such an atmosphere. But as an entrepreneur, as a businesswoman, I can say that we're working in a very highly competitive industry, and there I can always bet that we would be, the profit and return on investment would be much higher than any of our competitors to speak with. So when we have been recognized by WEPs in 2013 as an exemplary company, that had a very big impact in our country and also in the business environment. That was, let me give you this example from, again, our clothing fashion industry. Something is becoming a fashion, a trend, a philosophy is becoming a fashion. When people really strongly believe in it, they want to be part of it, and they really support it all together, then it spreads. And I think ourselves, being WEPs awarded company, started the niche, and then now WEPs principles in the business community should become the fashion of the future and the main trend everywhere in the world, not just in our country, but everywhere, so that we can really make the world, first our own companies, then our community, then the world being a much more livable and breathless place to live in. So I have been appointed as the spokesperson for 2 years for the business world for WEPs. So I would speak out loud and try to convince in each and every country and business and industry to say that if you are going by the WEPs principles in your company and in your system, that would be really for a better world and for a better environment. And let's work for it together to make it happen. My last word would be I wouldn't really stop myself for not making this statement that lately and recently our world is getting really every day in a much more war state, and really international terrorism is affecting us all. And I would like that woman voice to be heard all over by the politicians, even though it's not our ground, that they should take the example and really stop that for us to really be in a different world. And thank you for giving me the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. Thank you, Noor. Najma, let me turn to you. As a business owner deep in the largely male bastion of construction, have there been particular barriers that you've had to overcome? And how do you get women into a so-called non-traditional job? What were the issues that you had to confront? And how can we open up opportunities for women in that field?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. There certainly were barriers that I've had to overcome. And I think the most important one was just overcoming the fact that I'm in a male-dominated industry. I think a profound and really, a comment that I had from someone one day was that I was interviewed by a client who is, a state-owned enterprise, and they needed to ensure that my company was indeed female-owned and female-managed. They wouldn't accept that I was actually at the head of the company, and they thought that I was, just there as a token. And this gentleman flew from Johannesburg, by the way, I'm in Cape Town, and he flew from Johannesburg and he came to see me. He interviewed me, asked me about my role in the company. And when I was able to answer him, his reply was that he would be able to go back and tell people that he has met an intelligent lady with a scarf. It was the worst comment ever, but it just made me so much more determined, to prove to people that we can do it. And look, I think what is difficult is the fact that we are, I'm in a distinctly male-dominated industry, both my companies. I am the person to change that. I truly believe. I cannot expect anyone else to change that perception. And that is why I take it as important that I'm the face of the company, that I know exactly what the company is about, what the work we do. I understand every aspect of it so that I can change the perceptions that people have of women in male-dominated industries. Thank you.
Right, Najma. Let me turn to Tammy now. Do these actions track with what you've had to do and been able to do in your area? What's similar and what's different? And what are the results to get women into decent jobs today?
Well, I think I only have 4 minutes, which probably won't be enough time. But as a CEO of a bank, I'm usually the only female in the room when I'm meeting with my peers. And I absolutely agree. It is our responsibility to change what people associate as the look and face of what a CEO, a bank CEO, or a CEO of any kind looks like. I don't think that there's one answer. We can go back to education at the early level. We can go up to just appointing women, qualified women to boards. And I really argue with the theory that there's not enough women out there that are eligible for boards, because any of us who have sat on a board or attended a board sees that there are men on boards that also shouldn't be on boards. So I really believe that everyone has a responsibility, whether you're a mother and encouraging your son to treat everyone as equals, whether you're a male or female employer and require gender-neutral job advertisements and men and women on interview boards. I strongly believe in private sector doing public reporting to be able to track how far they've come and also where they need to improve. But absolutely, we all need to be courageous, and we really need to stick together and support each other and just keep on fighting.
Tammy, thank you. Joshua, you've come to the gender role challenge as a CNN employee who put parenting first. I should add that you're a very special kind of employee. You are a highly recognized journalist who wasn't afraid to take on his employers. You represent a new wave of male leaders challenging social norms, turning the traditional views of gender roles upside down, really, to get them right side up. Family responsibilities have been the social conundrum of the equality change agenda, and it's relatively recent that business has really taken an interest in this. So from your experience with the CNN and what you've learned from researching and working on your recent book, All In, How Our Work First Culture Fails Dads, Families and Businesses, tell us, how do you think we can fix it?
Right. Should I turn this on? Do I have to click? All right. So, hi, everybody. It's amazing to be here. How can we fix this? This is essential, and I'm glad that you set me up that way. I want everyone to know where I'm coming from on this. My background was that I was a fact checker at CNN, and I was fact checking all sorts of things. Politicians who really enjoy making things up, and pundits, world leaders. I was fact checking everyone. And then I started to turn that lens on modern parenthood, and I started to see, when I became a parent, how incredibly many popular myths there were about moms and dads. And I was covering that. And then I started to look at policies and how to this day in the workplace, as you're presenting when you bring this up, so many policies are still designed based on what in this country we can call the Mad Men era. And that's a reference to a TV show which looks at the 1950s. Basically, work cultures around the world were designed on a very gender normative, or a very gendered idea that women are supposed to stay home and men are supposed to stay at work. So I started covering that, and then all of a sudden I became the dad in the news because my wife was very sick with our third child, and my daughter was born prematurely, and I had told the company in advance, hey, I'm going to need the caregiver leave. And that came as a shock to them, because a man who has a baby the old-fashioned way, how could he possibly be the caregiver? That doesn't even make sense to them. So, and it was very strange policy, because if I gave my daughter up for adoption and another guy adopted her, he could get 10 paid weeks to care for her. But I couldn't get 10 paid weeks to care for her because I had her the old-fashioned way. And there were so many strange things about it. So the short version is I took legal action, and the company revolutionized its policy, and they will tell you the same thing that I will, that the better policy is a win-win for the company. And that's what my book, All In, is all about as well. And in the process, I got all this attention, and it came as a surprise. And so I tried to figure out what was so interesting about my case, and I came to understand what it was. That to many people, my case became a symbol of what was wrong with these policies all over the world. That they are designed, to this day, to be gender police, pushing women to stay home and pushing men to stay at work. And when you understand that, all of a sudden so many things come into focus. For example, it is a national shame in this country that we are the only developed nation that does not have a paid maternity leave system. It makes no sense, okay? And here's the problem. A lot of people will complain about that, but no one ever explains why. When I dug into the book, suddenly I understood why. It was like, eureka. Of course we don't have paid maternity leave. The thinking is, she's a woman. Who needs her money? The man's supposed to make the money. When you understand the mentality behind it, you see what's wrong. Oh, cool, okay, this is my paternity leave map. Take a look at this. The darker the nation, the more paternity leave is available. So the United States is, of course, one of the lightest because we have nothing. But what's really pathetic about this is the overwhelming majority of available paternity leave in the world goes unused. So even though it's dark in a lot of these countries, it doesn't even matter. The vast majority all over the world goes unused. And why? Because of stigmas. We can thank HarperCollins for this nice graphic. This isn't a line from my book, but this is a proven fact that there are all these stigmas in which men who dare to take time off for caregiving are demoted or fired when they return. So men are afraid of this. So all of a sudden, this role became so clear to me. The role at which negative expectations, backward expectations of men is hurting women in the workplace. Because when you have a culture and a set of policies that push against men being caregivers, you're going to take women's choices away. You're going to take everyone's choices away, and that ultimately hurts everyone. And just one thing that I found really interesting in an international study showed that the overwhelming majority of men worldwide want to have more time at home with their kids. These stigmas are global. Now, does this mean that every man is like me, lining up on the front lines of feminism? No. But the good news is that there are legions of men. There are literally millions of men around the world. I'm actually not, a lot of people start to think, oh, he must be exceptional. I'm not. I am in this country statistically the norm in terms of how committed I am to my family, the fact that I value it over money, because many of us, so many of us, are the children of feminists, and we grew up in an era in which we believed that there would be gender equality. But you know what happened? I was surrounded by all these brilliant women growing up. I went to Yale, which is a great school, surrounded by brilliant women. Then I get out in the workplace, and less than 5% of the CEOs are women. So what went wrong? What went wrong is I grew up with gender equality, but the workplace didn't. So when you talk about what needs to be done, what we need to have done is reform our policies and also our culture worldwide inside businesses, big and small, in order to make sure that families have choices. And to everyone outside this room who is hearing this, there's one thing that you need to know, okay? It is proven and it is fact that when you establish gender equality, you have better businesses, a better economy, a better society, and better off families. And what's best for families is always what's best for your society and for the world. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh, for that really refreshing point of view. It's really perfect for this event and for all our WEPs companies and our friends who are attending the 60th UN Commission on the Status of Women. I also just read about activism by a newly elected Myanmar parliamentarian, also a new mother, who discovered that although the number of women in the Union Parliament has doubled from 31 to 65, the facilities for working mothers and fathers, such as family care units, are nowhere to be seen. So I'd like to now turn to Tammy to see what's happening in Laos and at the bank in particular. How do your policies impact other businesses or the government, and how do they address the changing gender role?
Yeah, thank you. Well, interesting, in Laos, which is one of UN's least developed countries, we're seeing the same trends that we're seeing in developed countries like the US and Australia. We're seeing families move away from their home villages, usually for work. So the presence of family care isn't there. We're also seeing people having children at a later stage. So even when grandparents are there, they're much older and can't keep up with the toddlers and the needs for that a young infant would need. So we're seeing daycare requirements, an increased need for them globally. So in my view, there are three key areas, and we can all contribute, so pay attention. Government needs to play a role, private sector and employers need to play a role, and society needs to play a role. Now, for sure, I would not be standing here or sitting here today if I didn't have access to daycare. I absolutely needed it. And if I didn't have a husband, who's also here today, supporting me, treating me as an equal, and seeing that parenting is a two-person job, not just my responsibility. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't an or conversation. You're a good mom or you're fulfilled and have a career. Never in my household was it that. So what role does government need to play? Government needs to subsidize daycare. So if we look at Australia, Australia offers subsidies for daycare. It's not means tested, and it covers about 20% of the cost of daycare for one child in full-time daycare. That helps, and 20% sounds like a lot, but it's a very high starting base. So it's not enough. We need to see more subsidies, and we need to see things like tax breaks, so you can deduct the cost of childcare. Because let me tell you how the conversation happens today. Wife, husband, I want to go back to work. Husband, how much is daycare? Wife, about 2 times my salary. Husband, can't afford it? No. Done. That is not the way it should be. So we need governments to really step up and do things to support families, to have balanced households, to have both the man and the women achieving their fullest and feeling fulfilled as an individual as well as a parent. Employers, you could do more. So ANZ Banking Group in Australia is doing some phenomenal work in incentivizing women to come back. So we get a bonus when we come back to work. Fantastic. And that bonus is about 10% of the total cost for one child in full-time daycare. So now we're talking about 30%. But let's not forget that we're starting from a very high base. Right. So I've seen other companies do some great things like childcare at work, subsidized childcare, medical facilities at work. So when your child's sick, you can bring them in, get them checked out, and then maybe call grandma or a friend or a standby babysitter. You know, we need to make it helpful and easy for families, not just women, to be able to come back to work and be fully engaged. Now, the last part, society. I'd almost argue that this is the most important one. Society puts so much pressure on women that, back to the or conversation, you're either a good mom or you're a career person. They're not mutually exclusive. Don't ask my children, though. So we need to change that expectation. I was just sitting with someone, and I won't name the country, but in one country, they actually have a name for working moms or moms that put kids in daycare, and it loosely translates to bad mom, is the English translation. And let me tell you, I thought I was one of those bad moms when I was putting my first child in daycare. So as I was crying after I dropped him off for the very first day, off to my first day back at work after maternity leave, I Googled, long-term implication of child in daycare. I did, that's a fact. And actually what came up was an NIH, a US government study that went on for 15 years, 1,300 children. And what it was measuring was, is there cognitive or behavioral disadvantages for children that get put into full-time daycare versus those that stay at home? And what they found was, no, that there is not. Mm-hmm. Provided that the daycare is of good standard, and they do have a checklist, that it is the same thing. There's no long-term damage that we are doing to our children by putting them in daycare. Where there is long-term damage is when the mother is depressed, where there's conflict at home, and where the couple ends up divorced. So these are the things that really matter. Putting them in daycare, provided it's good quality, does not. One other point that I want to make. So we're all here. We may be mothers, fathers, employers, government representatives. We all have a role to play. Fathers, I'm doing a call to action to you today, right now. When you go home, go do the laundry. I notice only the women clap there. No, because what I have seen in all the countries that I have worked, women, society in general, we have to quietly succeed at our job while still doing all the at-home work activities. And that can't continue because that breaks us. We need to be partners. It is both parents' responsibility to make sure the house is clean, there's food in the refrigerator, the kids' school lunches are made. It shouldn't just be the woman's responsibility. I'll tell you one last anecdote. I'm working with the banks in Laos to actually apply the WEPs. They all signed up, wonderful. But speaking to a bank executive, not from ANZ Bank, another bank, they said, well, I get it, I totally believe in it, but we promoted a woman to an executive role, and a year later she was divorced because her husband didn't agree to the idea of suddenly he had to pick up more of the slack at home. So now we're not promoting women. Now, you tell me what's more unfair there. The company that's no longer promoting women, or the fact that the husband said, either you do the laundry or you're out?
Or the fact that they never cared if the men got divorced. I'm sure there were men who have been in that position too who got divorced, but it didn't occur to them to care. But they have to protect the marriage of the woman, but not of the man.
Yeah, absolutely. No. So those are the things. So governments, subsidies, tax rebates, tax incentives, employers, return to work bonuses, incentives, make it easy for both men and women to be able to come work while being a parent. And society, start chipping in more at home, stop waiting for someone to ask, and stop judging women who are just seeking personal fulfillment and who want to be defined more than just being a mom, but as being the individual as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Tammy. Clearly, leadership and setting the example matters a lot, as does the policy environment. So I'd like to move to Noor now. Noor, please tell us whether family policies were important to building your company and what was being offered to women and men.
So to complement what you have said, in order to have more access to jobs and to have women to stay in jobs, we've had flexible working hours systems for many years, starting from pregnancy of the woman till the child gets first to 2 years old, then up to 4 years old. We do not leave the woman to have this decision making between either you have to choose your family and child and don't work, or come to work and work. And we really believe that all women would manage to do so at their best if you give them the possibility of flexible working hours, and also using the technology. We can set their offices at home that they can work at a distance. So this first started for women, but then became a business working model in the company, that we are working in flexible hours. So what is it doing? Like, all these exemplaries are changing the way the men are looking at the family. It's changing how they are they are changing themselves, which makes another example to the whole society. So that I can say flexible hours has been a good policy as well.
Right, thank you, Noor. Najma, what about you? Family policies that you've had in your business. You've also got an informal sector of, women who are coming in as traditional, not as day laborers, and how does that affect them?
I must admit, I haven't really had major issues around that, but I do believe that companies, as Tammy said, companies need to recognize the multiple roles that women play. Things like on-site creches, obviously, I think it goes for the bigger companies, but just on-site creches, on-site gyms, and just more supportive, a more supportive environment for both men and women, for that matter. But just recognizing the fact that in more instances, women are the ones who play the multiple roles, and that companies can and should be more supportive of that.
Right. Quaylin, if I could bring you in here. Quaylin here, how did the parity report deal with this particular problem? Were there key recommendations that we haven't covered, or should be part of the international community's SDG efforts to deliver the world women want?
Absolutely. And so actually we took a look at the SDGs and aligned them with the impact zones that we talked about earlier. And I think the key insight here is a bit of what we talked about earlier in terms of inspiring cross-sector collaboration between government entities, between the nonprofit sector, and between the private sector. And those are the actions both individually within companies, within organizations, as well as across organizations, and those collaborations that we've seen be most successful. We've seen companies sort of drive out across their value chain. So for example, Unilever working with their value chain and 70,000 entrepreneurs across India to distribute their goods. We've also seen companies within their network really change how they recruit and drive and retain those women.
Okay, so we'd like to take on a couple of questions now. We've got about 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, if we can get those hands up, I'm going to take 2 or 3 together, and then we can go on to. So when you're called on, just press the button on the microphone and wait for it to light up and turn red, and then state your name and the organization you represent and to whom you are addressing that question.
Beliciano, and I'm Director of Corporate Responsibility for RELX Group. And my question is, I guess, for Killen, but for the panel. It's truly shocking when I see that it's going to take, till 2095 until parity is a reality. And I'm just wondering how fast that can come down. How many years can we cut that down to? Not least because, as we've heard, there are more women, one of our earlier speakers, in higher education. And when we look at how much change has already occurred, say, from the days of Mad Men to today, look around this room, really, what can we expect by good practice?
Yeah. Unfortunately, that statistic, the 100 years, is actually based on the last 3 or 4 years of progress. So it's this day and age. It's not looking back over the last few decades. It's our current rate of progress. And unfortunately, this is a persistent issue that just takes a really long time to solve. And so as you look back over the funnel, I think the fastest rate of improvement we can look at is how do we pull women at each level through that funnel better? And if you remember, at the VP level and above, many companies, at least the Fortune 500 companies in the survey, were quite good at pulling women through that middle level of management up through those next levels, maybe not enough in line roles and P&L responsibilities as other roles, but actually there's few enough women, is a different way to think about it. There's few enough women that they're visible enough and they're getting pulled through that funnel well. It's actually at the entry levels and those earlier stages that it's harder. So a couple of banks, for example, looked at their funnel, and at that first manager promotion, what they found was one of their requirements was that the branch manager move locations at a pivotal, that happened to coincide with when women were having kids, and to move at that stage was really difficult, and so a lot of women were falling out of their funnel. So I think the rate of change is really limited by how companies can rethink what does it require to actually make change, as well as some of the internal policies. So for example, Google asks that for a promotion, you apply for a promotion. On the face of it, it's very gender neutral, but we all know, a woman is much less likely, even with the same credentials, to apply for a promotion than men. And so to accelerate this rate of change is really about across the full funnel in all of our policies at all levels, accelerating that change and hopefully shortening that 100 years to 10, 20 years.
Najwa, you want to come in on this?
Yes, I would like to. I cannot say how soon it can happen, but I just want to just very briefly share my story. And that is that it was in 1999 that I started my building maintenance services company. And one of my biggest clients was South Africa's energy supply company, known as Eskom. After 7 years of service doing building maintenance services for them, I saw an opportunity to get into electrical reticulation, to actually offer Eskom their core business, do the actual work that they do. And I did research and I spoke to various people. And when I realized that this is really what I want to do, I went to the managers at Eskom and I told them this, I'm interested in starting a company like this. They were very excited to get me on board. They offered me support. They offered me guidance to get my company set up. Today, 10 years later, we build low, medium, and high voltage power lines, and we do electrical connections, etc. The reason that Eskom was happy to support me is that South Africa has what is called a broad-based black economic empowerment policy. And the Act really came into being in 2003 to address the injustice of the past. There's various other forms of legislation that's in place. However, the rate of change is, there's still so much that needs to be done. After, 13, 15 years, there's still a lot of work to be done in this regard. And I believe the reason for that is that there is a lack of accountability. We have the legislation in place, but there is no accountability. Nobody's made to stand on a red carpet and explain why targets aren't met. So it is 2016. We definitely need to see a more rapid rate of change in this regard. And I just want to say that what was noted is that our state-owned enterprises show better gender transformation than our private companies, and yet it is the responsibility of all organizations to put measures in place to ensure that we reach gender parity.
Right. Thank you so much. I know that lots of hands are going up, but I have the pressure of, time control. I'm just going to allow our panelists to quickly get in 10 seconds each. I know Tammy has a word to say as well.
I'll be super fast. Yes, we can speed it up. And I'll talk to you more afterwards about how, but there are three things that it boils down to: laws, policies, and stigmas. There are laws that you see in Northern Europe that show it can be speeded up, and more countries can adopt that, and if they do, it will be much faster in more countries. And as for corporate policies, I've been traveling around the world now working with businesses, doing these diversity and inclusion events in which we get large numbers of men to show up, and when you do that, it's about the language that you use, it's about the way that these things are constructed. All of a sudden, male leaders and male participants feel more of a stake for themselves in making these changes happen, so we can do it on an individual level as well in these companies, so it can happen. The trick is taking those abilities and reaching out to parts of the world that are especially resistant to that progress.
And I'll add to it quickly. We need to decide. It's as simple as that. If you look at the CEOs that we're honoring today, those CEOs decided that they were going to make a difference on gender equality. Until every single person in this room, watching this globally, our leaders decide categorically that we're going to make a change and we're going to end this gender inequality, we're always going to be chasing that number. So let's make an agreement that we're going to decide that this is going to be a moot point tomorrow.
Correct. This is such a vibrant conversation, and I'm sorry that I have to end it here. I know there are lots of questions there, but our panelists are going to be available, so you can take it offline. Thank you so much to our panelists for your inputs and your commitment to make the world that we want. You've given us so much to think about, so thank you very much.